U.S.-led coalition in Syria, saying that it is protecting al-Nusra from terrorists operating in the Arab country.
It seems to us, referring to the experience of war on terrorism in Syria, that the forces of the international coalition led by the United States have been taking mercy on Jabhat al-Nusra, or whatever its name is now. Additional evidence of the attempts to protect the terrorist group in its new reincarnation has become available in recent days. We believe this is a very dangerous game and it needs to stop.
Lavrov said the U.S. appears to have been protecting foreign-backed militants such as the Nusra Front from aerial bombardments. During a press conference with his Ethiopian counterpart in Moscow, Lavrov stressed that the coalition's move violates all international law. The top Russian diplomat also underlined the need to eliminate double standards regarding the fight against terrorism. Washington has recently come under severe criticism after American warplanes shot down a Syrian government jet near the Syrian city of Tabqa and a drone in the country's south. Moscow said that the attacks were yet another sign that the U.S. is complicit in the acts of terror groups in Syria. Fred Weir is a journalist and political commentator who joins us from Moscow. The particular incident that I think has given rise to the Russian foreign minister saying this is the shooting down of that Syrian jet. I believe that they were targeting Nusra Front terrorists. Is that what this was in reference to, or are there numerous other examples of this kind of action?
Well, you also have the Israelis bombarding the Syrian army near the Golan Heights, and they are also fighting those very groups. You have a pattern of things that are happening that suggest that something is changing in Syria, and I think that it may be that we're headed towards some sort of an end game. The Syrian army is trying very hard to restore its control over the border in the south and the east, and the United States and its allies are trying to prevent that. They're more actively than ever. And this probably suggests that the Americans and their allies would like to partition Syria. I think in the end game, they certainly are trying to forestall advances or any rapid advances of the Syrian army. There is a lot of discussion that suggests the Americans don't think it would be legitimate somehow for the Syrian army to take control of all of Syria. What I think we're being set up for is discussions about dividing that country, and somehow these daily back and forth between, especially Moscow and Washington, seem to be suggesting that this is the nub of the issue that's coming up. The Russians would really like for the United States to get behind a final push to eliminate all the main jihadist rebel groups, and that includes the organization formerly known as al-Nusra, especially because it is basically an extreme organization that has been affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. ISIS is now perhaps nearing its end, let's hope. And so a new stage is in the offing.
Thank you for that, Fred Weir. Iran's leader says Palestine is the Islamic world's key issue and that it is incumbent upon the entire Muslim community to fight Israel. In this edition of the debate, we'll discuss the plight of Palestinians and why their dream to be free of occupation and a return to their homeland remains so elusive. We'll discuss the recent developments covering the Israel-Palestine so-called peace efforts, which could be dead in the water before it even gets started. Our guest joining us with this edition of the debate, we have Kevin Barrett, who's a lecturer and editor at Veterans Today, joining us from Madison, and also Lawrence Korb, U.S. Foreign Policy and National Security Analyst, who joins us from Washington. Lawrence Korb, let me first start with you. How would you describe the current state of the Palestinian cause and why it remains so elusive in terms of the dreams and aspirations of wanting a Palestinian state?
Well, I think you've got two problems. We not quite sure who speaks for the Palestinians. Is it Abbas or is it somebody from Hamas? The other basically is why have they turned down the proposals that were made? For example, Ehud Olmert, who was Netanyahu's predecessor, said go back to the 67 lines with agreed upon swaps. President Clinton said the same thing with Netanyahu with the Y plantation. back in 2000, and Yasser Arafat turned it down. So that's the thing. The things have been offered, they've been turned down, and then of course with this lack of leadership since Arafat has passed, we're not quite sure who speaks for the Palestinians. But American President Trump just sent his son-in-law, his most trusted advisor, over there to speak to the Palestinians. President Obama had George Mitchell, former majority leader of the U.S. Senate, with strong ties to the Arab world over there to try and get something. So not for lack of intention. I think the real question is who can speak and will they accept the deal that basically is reasonable?
Well, Kevin Barrett, I'm sure you have a response, but since Lawrence Korb mentioned Kushner, what is Jared Kushner doing in occupied Ramallah to try to solve a decades-old problem? What kind of input and role can he possibly have?
Well, Jared Kushner has a very dicey background. His father is a notorious kosher Nostra figure who spent time in prison. Trump himself has worked for the same organized crime outfit. He was created by Ray Cohn, who ran New York for the mafia, and J. Edgar Hoover, who was part of it. He was Hoover's enforcer. So these are all organized crime people. And Kushner, he should be in jail. He should, he should at least be, under scrutiny for the fact that he's part of an organized crime family. But then again, so is Donald Trump. These people obviously are never going to solve the Palestine question. I would like to respond to Mr. Korb's claim that the problem is in the Palestinian camp, that they didn't accept the supposedly generous proposals under Clinton. Those so-called land swap proposals were surrender proposals, Mr. Korb. They were proposals for the Palestinians to accept all kinds of massive colonization that meant that their country would not only not be contiguous, but it would be essentially just a tiny tissue of broken up Bantustans, and they wouldn't have Jerusalem al-Quds as their capital. So that's a non-starter for every Palestinian, and it always will be, and for every Muslim on earth, and for every one of the many people from the colonized world. See, this is why Palestine is the most important issue, as the Supreme Leader of Iran said, not only for the Muslim world, but for the entire world. There are really three overriding reasons for this. One is that it's holy land. It's holy to all of the world's Abrahamic monotheists, about 97% of whom are Jewish or Christian, are Christian or Muslim, and only a few percent are Jewish, actually perhaps closer to 1%. So what we have now is an occupation by a tiny hostile minority of monotheists of the Holy Land. Reason number two that this is the most important issue in the world is that this is the last settler colony in the world. Settler colonialism was the most brutal form of European colonialism. It genocided people in Libya, Algeria, all over the world. The Southern Africa, of course, is another well-known case. There's only one settler colony left, and that is occupied Palestine. And the third reason that this is so important is that essentially Zionist-occupied Palestine is a Rothschild bankster fiefdom. The Rothschild bankster empire that dominates Western finance is essentially the deep state that rules the West, and it has been ever since they got the right to create all Western currency out of nothing at interest and lend it into existence at interest. This is the fundamental structural problem that we have in today's world in terms of an illegal, illegitimate power structure. So for all of these reasons, Palestine is by far the most important geopolitical issue in the world, and this goes even more so for Muslims who have been at the receiving end of all of these injustices.
Do you think that is indeed the case, Lawrence Korb, that Palestine remains one of the most important geopolitical issues in the world?
No, I agree, and that's why, as I mentioned, residents have focused so much on it, because until you solve that, it's going to be hard to deal with a lot of the other issues. So yes, it is important. Now, we can argue that Kushner should or shouldn't be, but he is Trump's closest advisor, and we should argue whether Trump should have been elected, but he was. So he sent his closest advisor, which shows that he sees it as an important problem.
Well, Kevin Barrett, when it comes to the path that this has to be taken, that this process has to go through, and the end game, what is it right now? Are we looking at a two-state solution? which has long been an objective for this negotiated settlement? Or are we looking at a one state? What is it that Palestinians want, and what is it that appears to be this so-called peace process pushing for?
Well, Palestinians have always wanted a one-state solution. That is, they've wanted to end the genocidal ethnic cleansing against their people and be equals in Palestine. And under those circumstances, I think virtually all Palestinians would be perfectly happy to allow the Jewish invaders, occupiers, and genocide perpetrators to repent and stay there and keep their property and continue to operate as one state. So I think that's been the really the desire of the Palestinian people from the get-go. Whereas of course the Zionists want to keep their Jewish supremacist state going so that they get all of these extra privileges, and so that the Palestinians are second and third class citizens. Now the two-state solution is now off the table. It's a non-starter. It's just not going to happen. There are more than 500,000 settlers squatting on the land that was stolen with the Israeli war of aggression in 1967, and they're not going to leave. The whole Israeli leadership has sworn to a blood pact to die fighting rather than allow the evacuation of the West Bank settlements. Alan Hart, the former BBC correspondent from occupied Palestine, who was a close friend of Golda Meir, Yasser Arafat, and many others, has testified to that. He got that firsthand from one of the people who had signed this blood pact. There is never going to be an evacuation of those settlements. Therefore, the only possible solution is a one-state solution. Israel-Palestine needs an equal protection clause. Every member of society in Israel-Palestine, whatever their race, ethnicity, or religion, deserves 100% equal treatment. No more Jews-only roads, no more checkpoints, no more Jews-only housing developments, no more Jews-only subsidies, no more Jewish state that any Jewish person from the whole world can come to and become a first-class citizen. That is all a grotesque injustice. It needs to be one united Israel-Palestine for all of its people.
Well, when it comes to negotiations, Lawrence Korb, why should Israel even negotiate? Why should they be pressured? Because at this point, they don't really see any benefits in making concessions. And at the same time, you really have the world that has remained silent on the Palestinian plight.
Well, I think they should do it because it's the right thing to do. And there's a lot of Israeli leaders, unfortunately not a lot of them are in government now, who do this. And go back to this point here, when Ehud Olmert did it, it was agreed upon land swaps. It wasn't, we're going to tell you what to do. Both parties had to agree to it. And I think that's the key thing. Same way with Clinton and Arafat. Both had to agree to it. So it's not a question of, we're going to dictate the terms to you. And the other thing is, while there's a lot of the settlements are still there, some have been evacuated, just like the Israelis got out of Gaza. Everybody said, oh, they would never do that. Well, they did. And I think for the Israelis, it would then end this feeling that they're permanently under siege if they could do that.
Very well. It's a good time to take a quick time out and listen to some of the Facebook comments as posted on our Facebook page.
There should be unity with all Muslims in the region, and then the first step will be to destabilize the entire Zionists the same way they are doing. They should taste the bitterness they've planted years back, and then things will work the way Allah has commanded. Arabs or Muslims, I don't know the difference, but I feel their pain. They will further divide, but none will benefit. With unity, they will achieve everything, but not with arms. I'm not Muslim, I'm Christian, but honestly, what Israel is doing to the people of Palestine is very cruel, satanic, and should not be entertained at all. Both sides will be better off trading with each other. The Iran and Israel conflict is childish squabbling. Both sides would rule the Middle East if they work together. First of all, Muslims should end Shia-Sunni conflicts. We should unite and leave enemies' hand and stand fast for each other. We are being butchered everywhere. It is high time to get united.
Just some of the Facebook comments there. Well, Kevin Barrett, there's a new landscape right now in the Middle East that has been formed, and that was very evident on two counts. One, the visit by Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia, and of course, as weeks go by, there's not an issue that comes to the surface of news that shows the expanding relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Of course, they say that they have no diplomatic relationship. How much do you think Saudi Arabia's closeness to Israel is a stab in the back for the Palestinians?
Oh, it's a complete stab in the back to the Palestinians. But it's really not so much that the Saudis have just now suddenly become Israel's allies, or some would say Israel's slaves. This has been essentially the role that so-called Saudi Arabia has played forever, even before the country existed in that form. The Wahhabi Ibn Saud alliance was just a bunch of desert bandits who never would have gone anywhere if they hadn't been supported by British imperialism. They were turned into kind of a terrorist force on behalf of British imperialism to destabilize the region on behalf of the British. And then when the Americans took over in 1945, they continued to play the same role, although, with different degrees of intensity and subtlety. So what we're seeing today is that the Saudi Wahhabi alliance to be basically mercenaries on behalf of the Western invaders and the Zionists has come right out of the closet, and they even admit what they're doing now. Whether they can get away with this remains to be seen. Muslims have largely been hoodwinked during the past several years. After Hezbollah won its victory in 2006, a tremendous, lavishly funded Shia-phobia campaign was incited to try to convince the many, all Muslims, even some of the Salafis and the Saudis were cheering for Hezbollah in 2006, and the Zionists panicked, and so a multi-billion-dollar propaganda campaign was launched to try to divide Muslims. But now I think that it's become so extreme, and we've got Turkey, Qatar, the Ikhwan, or the Muslim Brotherhood, and Iran all lining up more or less on the side of the Palestinians with various degrees of intensity. And on the other side, we've got the brutal dinosaur dictatorships of the region. Al-Sisi, the butcher of many thousands, if not tens of thousands of peaceful protesters. We've got the Ibn Saud crime family run by a crazy young guy with no experience who's getting deeper and deeper into chaos. And then these extremely wealthy playboy Emiratis. All of these evil forces in the Middle East are lining up on one side, and the forces of reason and progress are lining up on the other.
Well, Lawrence Korb, when it comes, I'm going to address the same question to you, really, and that is the role that Saudi Arabia at this point is playing regarding the Palestinian cause. And the reason why I'm highlighting that is because of the past, how they portrayed themselves as being supporters of the Palestinian cause. But yet in action, we have not seen anything from Saudi Arabia, and now we're seeing more of the bond established between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Well, there's no doubt about that the Saudis have tried to broker their deal. About a decade ago, they proposed a solution to it, so they have been, and I think they can play a very, very constructive role given their stature, particularly in the Sunni world. So I think they can play a very, very creative role, and I thought it was interesting.
They're Wahhabis.
President
They're not
Trump,
Sunnis.
he went to Saudi Arabia.
Kevin Barrett, go ahead.
I thought it was very
No, go ahead, Lawrence Korb. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I didn't know you had called on him. Okay, after the Trump went to Saudi Arabia, then he went to Israel. Then he went to the Vatican. The Vatican has tried to play a constructive role there, and I think everybody realizes until you solve this in a way that's equitable for all, you're still going to have a lot of other problems in the region. And I think that the Saudis can play a constructive role, whether we like it or don't. They have a certain amount of stature among the Middle East countries.
Kevin Barrett, don't you think that the only way that this can be solved based on the decades experience that we are seeing, not only from the way that this issue has moved forward, is the fact that the U.S. can't be the mediator? They should pull out of that position?
Absolutely. The lesson of Trump's visit to Riyadh and then Tel Aviv and occupied Al-Quds was obviously that the U.S. is going to line up on the wrong side of everything now, even more than in the past. And at the same time, the U.S. has lost in all of its military engagements, or at least it's lost, assuming its goals, stated goals, were the real goals. It's lost in Iraq, it's lost in Syria, It's lost in Libya. It's lost in Afghanistan, the biggest quagmire in all U.S. history. So the U.S. just can spread chaos wherever it goes, but it can't ever win the peace. The U.S. needs to get out of that region, and I would go further and say the U.S. needs to withdraw from all of the countries it's occupying, which are the majority of countries in the world. We have 900 military bases occupying countries all over the world. Every one of those countries are occupied, and just like in the Muslim world, for instance, Morocco, where I'm familiar with, when the Sauds come in, or when the rich Saudis come into Morocco, it's lock up your daughters. These crazy, criminals are in town. The same thing is true around the military bases. Lock up your daughters. The crazy American occupying criminals are running around loose in there, getting drunk and perpetrating abominations. So we need to shut down the U.S. empire, but we need to begin by shutting it down in the Middle East, where it's done so much damage since 9/11, the inside job, Zionist coup d'etat designed to launch the destruction of 7 countries in 5 years, the very 7 countries that were a problem for Israel in the Middle East. The U.S. has trashed the region. It needs to get out and pay many trillions of dollars in reparations.
Lawrence Corp, at the same time, isn't it true that if the U.S. wanted to, by its pressure on Israel, that this process can move forward?
Well, I think, as I say, they have done it in the past. There's a limit to what they can do if the other side doesn't accept it. For example, as I mentioned, with Olmert and back with Netanyahu with the Y plantation, we did apply the pressure, and then Arafat said yes, then he changed his mind. And in the same way with Olmert. So we have applied the pressure. It hasn't worked. And again, it's getting harder and harder because you don't have a unified Palestinian leadership. And again, we can go on forever and ever about the U.S. role in the world. That's a whole different thing. We certainly have made mistakes. I oppose the invasion of Iraq, but the fact of the matter is, every time we talk about leaving, people say, "Don't. We need you here. We need you to provide, the stability." So I think the real issue here is Palestinian leadership, and as I say, the fact that the president has put his most trusted advisor, you can agree he shouldn't, who happens to be, a Jewish, I think he has more of a chance than a lot of other people would do, because if he says to Israel, you need to do this, people can't accuse him of being biased.
30 seconds to you, Kevin Barrett, in closing.
Oh boy, I don't know how to respond to that, other than to say that people in the countries the U.S. is occupying, especially in the Middle East, have been saying get out forever. The democracy movement in Bahrain is in large part about getting the U.S. Fifth Fleet out of occupied Bahrain. The situation in Yemen is largely about the honest Yemenis are the ones who want the U.S. out of Yemen. The same thing is true in Syria. The Syrian government is being attacked and destabilized because it wants to be reasonably independent, not a U.S.-occupied country. Obviously, Iran has been dedicated since the revolution
unfortunately, I got to jump in.
imperial Zionist influence.
I do apologize.